and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. I hope you enjoyed the first segment of the show. Before we get into the second segment, as always, do consider leaving a tip or donation at the link gsmc.cloud to support both the network, myself, and my fellow podcasters. It is greatly appreciated. Moving on to the second segment of the show, we switch from the NBA to the NHL, where the Florida Panthers take on the New York Rangers in an exhilarating Game 4. After an exhilarating Game 3 where the Rangers kind of stole the game away from Florida after they were outshot, and they took it in overtime off an Alex Wenberg goal. Ironically enough, his first goal ever as a New York Ranger, coming in a big-time game in the Eastern Conference Finals. Tonight's Game 4 should be a very good matchup. Let's look at the betting odds for tonight's game. The money line sits at New York at plus 145 and Florida at minus 170. The total for points is 5.5. So obviously a very even game to match what happened in Game 3. But considering fantasy perspective, this is really anyone's game here because there have been so many different contributors for both Florida and New York in this series. So I can't really say who's going to step up for either side tonight. But if you want to bank on someone on Florida continuing his production, how about Sam Reinhart last game? One of the main reasons why Florida was even in that game despite outshooting the Rangers. He had 2 power play goals in that game. Sam Reinhart tonight is valued at 6.8K, and he's projected to have 13.3 fantasy points tonight. And in my opinion, that is a bargain. He is solid in the power play, solid in the faceoff, just an overall well-rounded athlete. Helps out Florida defensively, and just a huge impact player whenever the power play unit for Florida is on the ice, or even at even strength. Such a solid player. A lot of blocked shots as well in the playoff. That is key in terms of building your fantasy roster if you're in a league that includes hits as a part of the scoring. But overall, Sam Reinhart is my headline player for the Florida Panthers tonight. In terms of looking at the New York Rangers, this is a team that is won by hook or by crook from support from all different lines. And I just want to highlight one player who I think has been kind of like the bell cow for the New York Rangers in these past couple of games. How about Barclay Goodrow? Not a popular player, not a sexy player for the New York Rangers, but I think that these past 2 games have shown how good he can be, how scrappy he is as a player, and I think that Barclay Goodrow is a player that a lot of people are underrating in terms of fantasy just because he's not, a scorer. He's not necessarily a nice name to have on your team, but overall Barclay Goodrow in these past couple of games has proven himself an overtime winner in the last game 2 games ago, and a goal in Game 3. I think that ultimately he's finding his confidence. He's solid in the face-off. He's solid in that line, that lower level line for the New York Rangers. And I think that Barclay Goodrow is a name to remember as a cheap option, only valued at 3K tonight. Only projected to have 5.2 fantasy points too. So if you're looking for a bargain and a steal at a low-key position, I think that Barclay Goodrow is your choice for tonight's game. Now looking at another important player for the New York Rangers, how about Igor Shesterkin? We always talk about goalies on this show. They are very important in terms of fantasy. If they get you a win, that's very vital. Igor Shesterkin got the Rangers a win in Game 3, in my opinion, a huge catalyst as to why they were able to take that game to overtime and ultimately win it. Obviously, letting up 4 goals as a goalie's got to hurt a little bit. He probably didn't want to give up as many goals as he did, but considering the fact that he faced so many high-danger scoring chances and the Rangers were outshot 37-23, saving 33 shots is not bad, and he made some big saves down the stretch to even get that game to overtime when they were overwhelmed in the third period of that game. So Igor Shesterkin, I think, is just going to need to step up his game a little bit. Obviously, he still is letting in goals, but I think what is most important to the Rangers' success is his clutch goaltending. Can he, late in the game, make some key saves to help propel the Rangers offensively as well? The Rangers all start with Igor Shesterkin. Igor Shesterkin is the heartbeat between the creases for the New York Rangers. Tonight, he's projected to have 14.3 fantasy points, and he goes for 8.3K. He's a highly coveted asset in terms of fantasy tonight. Another player on the Florida Panthers outside of Sam Reinhart is Brandon Montour, a very low-key guy. I don't think he's going to score as many points as some of the other forwards or defensemen on the Florida Panthers, like a Chuck or someone like that, or a Barkov, or even a Forsling. But I think Brandon Montour, in terms of such a scrappy young defenseman, I think that he is a huge asset if you're in a hits league that values hits. I think that Brandon Montour is one to look out for. Another cheap option. A little bit pricier than, say, a Barclay Goodrow, but I still think he's going to be a huge asset for the Florida Panthers tonight. In terms of how I think this game is going to go, I do not expect it to be as high scoring as Game 3. I think this is going to be a much lower scoring game, and it's going to be reflected in the fact that I think this game is going to go under the points value tonight. I think this is going to look like a 2-1, maybe 3-1 game for, I believe, the Florida Panthers to win this game. Coming into this series, Florida's hugest asset was probably the fact that they had the better line depth than the Rangers. They had the better goal scoring chances than the Rangers. They were going to pepper Igor Shesterkin, and it has translated, even though it hasn't translated in terms of wins, in terms of goals scored. I think that the Florida Panthers are a team that just will operate their game at any given time, and it's reflected in the stats. I think that ultimately tonight, I think that Florida will finally break through. I think that Sam Reinhart will have a huge game for Florida tonight. I think that in terms of goalies, I think that Sergei Bobrovsky, a player who we've talked about often on this podcast, is going to have another huge game. Kind of wants to bounce back from letting up 5 goals, including an overtime goal that was kind of scrappy and was scored for the first time by Alex Wennberg as a New York Ranger. So I kind of feel like he wants them to bounce back. I think that overall, the look for the Panthers to dominate in terms of power play, dominate in terms of penalty kill, and get even with the New York Rangers tonight. I think this is going to be a 3-1 final in favor of the Florida Panthers. So the New York Rangers will not cover. I think Florida will win outright. I think the Florida money line is looking kind of pretty right now. I think that at -170, it's a great value for you. But overall, this game is going to be a very tight game. I don't think this series is going to see that high level of goals as we've seen in prior games. I just think that something has to give for one of these teams. And for Florida, I think it's their time to prove to the New York Rangers that they are no slouch. I think that the Florida Panthers are kind of the beasts of the Eastern Conference, in my opinion, looking over the past couple of years. Yes, the Rangers have also made it to a conference finals before, but the Florida Panthers are looking to break through for the Stanley Cup. And the Rangers are, yes, the President's Trophy winners. Yes, they are pretty good in terms of playoffs at least, but their metrics show that they are kind of a paper tiger a little bit. I think that ultimately, coming in from the regular season, a lot of worries were on the Rangers. Yes, they've combated them in the playoffs by elevating their whatever makes them good, like their penalty kill, their power play. But ultimately, the Florida Panthers have more experience. I think they also utilize their players better. I think that their ability to rotate from a guy like Matthew Tkachuk to a guy like Alexander Barkov to a guy like Gustav Forsling to a guy like Sam Reinhart on the offensive side proves to me that the Florida Panthers are not going to fall down easily. I think that the New York Rangers have to be wary of that, and they have to also use their rotation to their advantage. Rotation is a very important aspect of this series, in my opinion. How will Laviolette view younger players in this series? Will Rempe get some good minutes? Will a player like Will Cooley get some minutes as well? I just think that ultimately The Panthers are older, they're more experienced, and they are looking to win the Stanley Cup final for me. So, in terms of betting, bet the Florida Panthers tonight to tie up the series. But that is just about going to do it for the second segment of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. Coming up next, we are going into our final ESPN rankings in terms of PPR leagues. Yes, we are going to be looking at the defenses. They are probably one of the more important aspects of fantasy football, so don't want to miss out on that segment.